Get her out of my waiting room. The words came from Dr. Sylvia Randall's office, sharp enough to cut through the frosted glass partition and land squarely in the hallway where Celeste Hawthorne stood with her 7-year-old daughter's hand folded inside hers. The hospital's chief pediatric neurologist, the fourth specialist they'd seen in 6 months, didn't bother to lower her voice. "I've reviewed the case file 3 times," Dr. Randall continued, and Celeste could hear the shuffle of papers being pushed aside with the casual indifference of someone clearing a desk. "There is nothing neurologically wrong with that child. Nothing. She has chosen not to speak. And no amount of her mother throwing money at this department is going to manufacture a diagnosis that doesn't exist. I will not see her again." Celeste didn't move. She stood in that corridor with the fluorescent light humming above her and the smell of antiseptic rising up from the polished floor, and she held on to Ivy's hand like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Because it was. Before we go any further, if this story is already pulling at something in your chest, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. We read every single one, and we love knowing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to the beginning. The morning had started the way most of their mornings started now, said quietly, not peacefully. There was a difference, though Celeste had taken a long time to understand it. Peaceful was the silence after a good meal, the stillness before sleep. The quiet inside their townhouse on Meridian Lane was something else. It was the kind of silence that had a shape to it, a weight, like furniture no one had agreed to put there, but everyone had to walk around. Celeste was up at 5:15. She was always up at 5:15 because sleep, for the past 2 years, had become something that happened to her in pieces. An hour here, 90 minutes there, snatched between the stretches where she lay in the dark, cataloging everything she'd gotten wrong and everything she still might. She made coffee, she checked her phone. There were 14 unread emails from Halcyon MedTech's product development team, 3 from her VP of Operations, and 1 from the hospital's scheduling coordinator confirming Ivy's 9 o'clock appointment with Dr. Randall. Celeste had been chasing this appointment for 11 weeks. Halcyon's legal department had spent the last month finalizing a research partnership with the hospital's neurological institute, and she had not used that fact to get Ivy's appointment accelerated. She had told herself that repeatedly. She heard Ivy's footsteps on the stairs at 6:40. Small, careful footsteps, the kind that belonged to a child who had learned somewhere along the way to enter rooms gently, as though testing whether she was welcome. Ivy appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing her yellow pajamas with the tiny blue stars and her hair loose around her shoulders, still tangled from sleep. She was small for 7. People always remarked on it, the way people remark on children's sizes, as though it tells you something. Ivy had her father's dark eyes and her father's way of watching, patient and still, taking in everything before deciding what to make of it. "Morning, Bug," Celeste said. Ivy lifted one hand in a small wave. She climbed up onto the stool at the kitchen island and folded her hands in front of her. Waiting. This was their language, a system of small gestures and understood routines that they had built together out of necessity over the past 24 months. A wave meant good morning. 2 taps on the table meant she was hungry. 1 finger raised meant she needed a minute. She had her own tablet with a communication app, which her speech therapist, Dr. Maricela Ortega, had set up for her. She used it when something needed more than a gesture, but mostly she didn't use it because mostly the things that needed to be said between the two of them had been reduced to what a wave and a look and a particular way of tilting her head could carry. It was functional. Celeste had convinced herself it was functional. She put scrambled eggs and half a piece of toast in front of Ivy without asking, because Ivy always wanted scrambled eggs on hospital days. Another understood thing. Then she poured herself more coffee and stood at the counter and watched her daughter eat, and she did not let herself think about the fact that 3 months after Marcus died, Ivy had been singing to herself in the bathtub, a tuneless, made-up song about a dog they didn't own. And then one morning the singing had stopped, and then the talking had stopped, and then everything had stopped, and no one had ever been able to tell Celeste with any certainty why. Selective mutism. That was the term Dr. Ortega used most often. Trauma-induced. Consistent with the psychological profile of a child who had experienced sudden, catastrophic loss. Treatable, in theory. Addressable through sustained, low-pressure therapeutic engagement. They had been doing sustained, low-pressure therapeutic engagement for 20 months. Ivy still did not speak. "We have the appointment this morning," Celeste said, as if Ivy didn't know. Ivy looked up from her eggs and gave a small nod. "Dr. Randall comes very highly recommended. She specializes in pediatric neurology. It's different from what we've been doing with Dr. Ortega. It's more about making sure there's nothing we've missed." She paused. "It's not going to hurt. It's mostly just questions." Ivy looked at her for a moment. Then she went back to her eggs. Celeste put her mug in the sink. Whitmore Children's Hospital occupied the corner of Ashfield Avenue and Lorne Street, a glass and brick building that tried hard to be welcoming and mostly succeeded from the outside. Inside, past the lobby murals of cartoon animals and medical scrubs, it was still a hospital. The smell, the sounds, the particular quality of waiting that happened in places where the stakes were always high. The pediatric neurology wing was on the 4th floor. Celeste and Ivy arrived at 8:50 and sat in the waiting area outside Dr. Randall's suite. The chairs were upholstered in green and orange fabric, cheerful colors that had seen too many hard conversations. Ivy sat with her tablet on her lap and her sneakers not quite reaching the floor, and she watched the other children and parents in the room with that patient, careful attention she always brought to new places. Across from them, maybe 6 feet away, a man sat with a boy who looked to be around 10 or 11. The boy had his right leg in a blue fiberglass cast that ran from knee to ankle, elevated on a padded footrest attached to a kind of folding transport chair. He had headphones around his neck and was working a handheld video game with fierce concentration, his tongue visible at the corner of his mouth. The man beside him looked like someone who had been awake a very long time. Not in a disheveled way. He was wearing clean dark jeans and a gray Henley, and his hair was combed, but in the way that you can't entirely fake alertness when the weariness runs deep enough. I was maybe late 30s, broad-shouldered, with the hands of someone who worked with them, and he was scrolling through something on his phone with his elbow on his knee and his jaw set in the way of a person who has learned to hold tension in their body so it doesn't show on their face. He wasn't doing a good job of it. The tension showed, but he was trying. Celeste noticed him the way she noticed most things, briefly, categorically. Father, injured child, another waiting room. She looked away. Then the man reached into the front pocket of his jacket and pulled out his phone. Not the phone he'd been scrolling on, that was already in his hand, but a second phone, older, with a cracked screen. He held it for a moment, looking at it. Then he pressed something on the screen. A voice came out of the phone's speaker, soft but audible in the quiet of the waiting room. "Eli, baby, if you're watching this, it means you already woke up, which means you already showed this whole world what you're made of. I need you to remember something while I'm away. I need you to remember that you are the bravest thing I ever helped make. Braver than you know. And I'm going to be right there when you open your eyes, okay? I promise. I promise I'm going to be there." The recording ended. The waiting room was quiet for a moment. Celeste's chest had gone strange and tight. She looked down at her hands. Beside her, she heard the smallest sound. So small she thought she had imagined it. She turned her head. Ivy was looking across the room at the man and the boy. Her tablet had slid sideways on her lap and she hadn't reached to straighten it, which meant her attention had gone somewhere else entirely. Her eyes were fixed on the man's old cracked phone with an intensity that Celeste recognized. She'd seen it before. In photographs. In Ivy's face at Marcus's funeral. This look of concentrated, desperate recognition, like her daughter was reaching for something just out of range. And then Ivy opened her mouth. "She sounds nice." 3 words, barely above a whisper. So quiet that the boy with the cast didn't look up from his game, and the other families around them didn't react at all, because it had been little more than breath, barely shaped into language. But Celeste heard it. Celeste heard every syllable of it, and her entire body went cold and then hot, and then very, very still, because that was her daughter's voice, Ivy's actual voice, not the voice of the communication app, not the flat digital text-to-speech, but Ivy's own voice, slightly husky from disuse, uncertain at the edges, real. And Celeste had not heard it in 22 months. Her hand tightened on the arm of the chair. The man across from them looked up from his old phone. He'd heard it too. His eyes moved to Ivy with a careful, unhurried attention, the way you might look at something unexpected that you didn't want to startle. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at Ivy. Ivy looked back at him. She was, he said. Quiet. Even. No fanfare, no alarm, just an answer given to a question, the way you'd answer any child who'd asked you something ordinary. She was really nice. Ivy considered this information with her father's patient gravity. Then she looked down at his phone. Is she far away? Celeste's hand flew to her mouth without her telling it to. The man held the phone up a little, almost like he was showing Ivy something she'd asked to see. Yeah, he said. Pretty far. Ivy looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at the boy in the cast, at Eli, who had still not looked up from his game. Is that her son? That's her son, the man said. My son. Ivy absorbed this. She looked at Eli again, then back at the man. Did she go far away like my dad did? The corridor outside Dr. Randall's suite was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a cart was being wheeled on linoleum. The fluorescent lights hummed. The man looked at Ivy steadily. He didn't flinch, and he didn't redirect, and he didn't reach for a more comfortable answer. He said, yeah, same kind of far. Ivy nodded. Like this was information she had already suspected, and having it confirmed settled something inside her that had been unsettled for a long time. Celeste had stopped breathing. She understood this, distantly. She was sitting 8 inches from her daughter in a waiting room on the 4th floor of Whitmore Children's Hospital, and her daughter had just said more words to a stranger than she had said to anyone in nearly 2 years. And Celeste's eyes were burning with a pressure she absolutely was not going to give in to in this waiting room. She was not. She was categorically not. I'm sorry about your mom, Ivy said to Eli. She said it in the direction of the top of Eli's head, which he still hadn't raised from his game. Her voice was a little stronger now, still quiet, still careful, but more deliberate. Like she was finding the edges of it, testing the feel of words in her mouth after their long absence. Eli looked up. He took in Ivy with a frank, assessing look of a kid who has spent a lot of time around adults and has learned to size up people quickly. Thanks, he said. Then, did your dad die too? Eli, the man said it gently. Not a reprimand exactly, more like a reminder. It's okay, Ivy said. And she looked at Eli, and she said, yeah, 2 years ago. Eli nodded with the matter-of-fact solemnity of someone who understands that death is not a subject you tiptoe around once you've had your own. Car accident, he said. Car accident, Ivy confirmed. They looked at each other for a moment, these 2 children who had been marked by the same kind of loss, with the uncomplicated recognition of people who belong to an unwanted club. I'm Eli, the boy said. Ivy, Ivy said. Cool name, Eli said, and went back to his game. Ivy almost smiled. It was a very small, almost smile, but Celeste saw it, and it was the most devastating thing she'd seen in 2 years. The man was looking at Celeste now, not intrusively. He wasn't staring, but he looked at her the way people look at each other across the shared understanding of something that can't quite be explained. His eyes were tired and honest, and he had a small scar above his left eyebrow that she hadn't noticed before, and he said, low enough that only she could hear, I hope that was okay. Don't apologize for that, Celeste said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. Please don't apologize for that. He nodded. Something shifted in his jaw. He looked like he understood and didn't need it explained, and that was enough. I'm Nolan, he said. Celeste. He nodded again. Neither of them said anything else, because there wasn't anything else to say right then. The moment had been what it was, and adding to it would only take something away. Dr. Randall's nurse appeared in the doorway at 9:03 and called Ivy's name. Ivy stood. She gathered her tablet. She paused, and then she turned and looked at Eli's father, at Nolan, and she said carefully and clearly, I hope Eli's leg gets better. Thank you, Ivy, Nolan said. Simple. No performance. Ivy turned and walked through the door. Celeste followed. She didn't look back. The appointment was 50 minutes long, and it was a disaster. Not clinically, Ivy sat through the testing protocols with the patients she brought to everything, following finger movements, responding to visual prompts, demonstrating reaction times on a small console Dr. Randall placed in front of her. She didn't speak during the assessment, not a single word. As though the 3 words she had said in the waiting room had been used up somewhere outside these walls, and there was nothing left to bring in here. Dr. Randall was a woman in her early 60s with a precise silver bob and reading glasses she wore on a cord around her neck. She was not unkind exactly, but she had the manner of someone who had made her mind up before the patient arrived and was now doing the courtesy of going through the motions. She asked Celeste questions while Ivy sat in the corner with her tablet. She reviewed the file from Dr. Ortega. She asked whether Ivy had experienced any recent changes in behavior, any regression, any new phobic responses. Celeste said, "She spoke in your waiting room this morning. 3 words, then more. A full conversation." Dr. Randall looked at her over the reading glasses. "To you?" "To another patient's parent, and to the patient. But not to you." The pause before Celeste answered was only a second. "Not to me." Dr. Randall made a note. The note looked brief. Selective expressivity within the mutism profile isn't uncommon. Low-stakes social encounters can lower the inhibitory response that typically, she said 14 words, Celeste said, in under 2 minutes, to a stranger. "Yes." Dr. Randall set down her pen, which is encouraging for the underlying capacity but doesn't alter the clinical picture. They talked for another 20 minutes. By the end of it, Celeste understood clearly and completely that Dr. Randall was not going to offer anything new. No new framework, no new approach, nothing that Dr. Ortega hadn't already tried or considered. She understood that this appointment had cost her 11 weeks of administrative maneuvering and about $400 after insurance, and she was going to leave with exactly what she'd brought in. She was gathering Ivy's things when she heard Dr. Randall's voice through the partition. "Get her out of my waiting room, and then the rest of it." The papers being pushed aside. The total casual dismissal, not just of the case, but of the possibility itself, of a 7-year-old girl who had been through something terrible and was trying, in the only way she knew how, to come back from it. Celeste stood in the corridor and held Ivy's hand and waited for the feeling in her chest to resolve into something she could use. It didn't resolve. It just sat there. "Okay," she said, to Ivy, to herself. "Okay." Ivy looked up at her. She squeezed Celeste's hand once, twice, 3 times. Their shorthand for "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here," and Celeste squeezed back, and they walked back toward the elevator together. They were almost to the elevator bank when Celeste heard Eli before she saw him. He was talking, loudly, with the uninhibited volume of a kid who has not yet fully internalized that hospitals have acoustics, about something called a respawn mechanic that was, according to Eli, completely broken, and whoever designed it needs to go back to school. Nolan was pushing the transport chair and had the look of someone who has heard about this particular mechanic several times today and has found a way to remain interested in it out of pure force of will and love. Eli saw Ivy first. "Hey," he said. "Ivy." Ivy stopped walking. "Did they fix whatever was wrong?" Eli asked. Ivy looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at his cast. "Nothing was wrong," she said, and her voice was still quiet, but it was there. It was present. "They just wanted to check." Eli nodded, accepting this. "My thing's wrong," he said, gesturing at his cast. 3 places. My dad says it's impressive in a not good way." "That's what I said," Nolan confirmed from behind the chair. Ivy looked at the cast with something like genuine interest. Then she looked at Nolan, then back at the cast. "Does it hurt?" she asked Eli. "Not anymore," Eli said. "It did at first. Now it's just boring." He paused. "My mom used to draw pictures on my casts when I broke stuff. I broke my arm once too." The hallway held very still for a moment. "She sounds nice," Ivy said, and this time it wasn't 3 quiet words. It was something more than that. It was something she meant. Nolan looked at his son, and then at Ivy, and then at some middle point between the elevator doors and the linoleum and the fluorescent lights, and his jaw did the thing it had done in the waiting room, that held tension thing, and then it relaxed, just slightly, because he'd made a decision about something. "She was the best person I ever knew," he said, honest and uncomplicated. "I think she'd have liked you a lot, Ivy." Ivy stood with that. She stood with it the way she stood with most things, not in a rush, not performing any reaction, just holding it and letting it be what it was. Then she looked at Celeste. Celeste was looking at Nolan. She didn't mean to. She just was. And he was looking back at her with those tired, honest eyes, And for a moment, Celeste felt the particular vertigo of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. The sense that a door had opened, somewhere, that she hadn't known was there. "Do you come here often?" she asked, and then immediately wished she'd phrased that differently. Nolan almost smiled. It was a very small, almost smile. "Every Tuesday and Thursday," he said. "Rehab appointments for the next 6 weeks." "We're usually Tuesdays too," Celeste said. "With Dr. Ortega. Different wing." He nodded. "Tuesdays then," she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't quite a statement. It was just a thing she said, and he heard it, and neither of them tried to make it into anything bigger than what it was. Just two people standing in a hospital corridor with their children, figuring out, very slowly, what came next. The elevator arrived. They rode down to the lobby in a quiet that was different from the silence in Celeste's townhouse on Meridian Lane. This quiet had other people's breathing in it. It had Eli's running commentary on what he planned to do to the broken respawn mechanic when he got home. It had Ivy's occasional soft responses, each one a small, ordinary miracle that Celeste was cataloging somewhere private and desperate inside herself. In the lobby, they parted ways. Eli waved to Ivy. Nolan gave Celeste a brief noddy that was somehow less awkward than a wave and more than a dismissal, something in between. The nod of a person who intends to see you again without making a production of the intention. Celeste walked Ivy to the car. She buckled her in. She closed the door. She stood on the driver's side of the car for a moment with her hand on the roof and her eyes on the parking garage ceiling. She sounds nice. 22 months of specialists and therapy sessions and carefully managed routines and the careful, grinding daily work of trying to reach her daughter across the distance that grief had put between them. And it had taken a man with a cracked phone in a hospital waiting room to open a door that Celeste had been knocking on, desperately and invisibly, for nearly 2 years. She didn't know what to do with that yet. She got in the car. "Hungry?" she asked. In the back seat, Ivy thought about it. Then she raised 2 fingers. "I know," Celeste said, starting the engine. "Me too." She pulled out of the parking space. And because it was just the two of them, and because no one was watching, and because her daughter had said her first words in 22 months to a stranger with a cracked phone and tired eyes, and because the world was sometimes stranger and more extraordinary than any of the controlled variables she managed for a living, Celeste let the tears come. Not sobbing, nothing like that. Just the quiet kind. The kind that run down your face while you drive and you don't wipe them because your hands are on the wheel and you don't actually want them gone yet. Just the tears, just the drive home, just her daughter in the back seat, looking out the window at the city going by, in a silence that, for the first time in a very long time, didn't feel entirely like a wall. The following Tuesday, Celeste told herself she wasn't paying attention to the time. She was paying attention to the time. She checked her phone twice between the parking garage and the elevator. Not for emails. Though there were emails. There were always emails. But to confirm it was 8:51, which meant they were 9 minutes early, which meant she had arranged their departure from home with the precise, slightly embarrassing intention of arriving before Nolan and Eli did. She hadn't admitted this to herself until the elevator doors opened onto the 4th floor, and she found herself scanning the waiting area before she'd fully registered that she was doing it. They weren't there yet. Celeste picked 2 seats, green chairs, same row as last week, different position, and settled Ivy in with her tablet and a small zippered pouch of colored pencils Ivy had recently started carrying everywhere. Dr. Ortega had suggested it. Something about giving her hands something to do in unfamiliar spaces. Ivy had taken to it without any particular enthusiasm, but with the cooperative pragmatism she brought to most of the things the adults in her life suggested, as though she had made a private calculation that these people were trying their best, and the least she could do was try the pencils. Ivy opened the pouch and selected a green pencil and began drawing something in the small sketchbook she kept folded inside her jacket pocket. Celeste watched her for a moment. Then she opened her own phone and found the 14 unread emails that had accumulated since she'd last checked 40 minutes ago and started working through them, because the alternative was sitting in a waiting room chair staring at a door, and she was not that person. She had almost convinced herself of this when she heard the transport chair's wheels on the linoleum. Eli came through the door first, or rather, he was pushed through the door first by Nolan, who had a paper coffee cup in his free hand, and the particular focused expression of someone navigating a doorway with both hands occupied and only partially succeeding. The cup listed. Some coffee escaped. Nolan said something under his breath that was probably not appropriate for a pediatric waiting room, and Eli said, "Dad, you're spilling," with the tone of a child who has witnessed this category of disaster many times before. "I know I'm spilling, Eli. You should have gotten a lid." "I got a lid. The lid is apparently decorative." Ivy looked up from her sketchbook. Eli saw her immediately. "Hey," he said, uncomplicated. The greeting of someone who has established that you exist in the same universe and is neither surprised nor particularly elaborate about seeing you again. "Hey," Ivy said. Celeste's heart did a small, involuntary thing that she chose not to examine. Nolan had found a way to stabilize the coffee cup against the handle of the transport chair, a solution that looked temporary and probably was. He looked up and met Celeste's eyes with a brief, tired nod that somehow communicated several things at once. Recognition, a lack of pretension about the fact that they had both noticed each other's arrival, and the shared mild exhaustion of two people who are held together primarily by the requirements of their children and the forward momentum of scheduled appointments. "The lid," Celeste said, nodding at the cup. "It came off in the elevator," Nolan said. "I don't know how. I feel like it's a personal attack." "The hospital cafe puts the lids on wrong," Celeste said. "They always have. I've lost 3 coffees to that elevator." He looked at her. "You've been coming here long enough to have a lid theory?" 8 months, she said. "Dr. Ortega, Tuesdays. Before that, we were at Carmichael over on 5th. Before that, we had a brief and unsuccessful relationship with a pediatric psychologist in Fenwick, who spent most of our appointments explaining why Ivy's situation was really about me." Nolan sat down 2 seats away, not immediately beside her, not across the room, 2 seats, which was the right distance for 2 people who did not yet know each other well enough to close the gap, but had apparently decided not to maintain maximum plausible deniability either. He set the coffee cup on the small table beside his chair, with the resignation of someone who has accepted that it will probably tip over and is prepared for this outcome. "Was it?" he asked. "About you?" "Parts of it, probably," Celeste said. "Most things are, when you look hard enough. He wasn't wrong, he was just not useful." Nolan considered this. "We had a therapist after Lauren died who kept telling Eli to journal his feelings," he said. "Eli was 9. He'd rather eat the journal." "Did you tell him that?" "The therapist?" "Eli." Nolan looked at his son, who was now engaged in what appeared to be a detailed explanation to Ivy of the structural inadequacies of his current video game, using hand gestures to illustrate something about a map that hadn't been designed with, in Eli's words, any understanding of basic physics. Ivy was listening with her sketchbook open on her lap. The green pencil paused, her full attention on Eli in the absorbed way she gave her attention to things that genuinely interested her. "He told me," Nolan said, "in those exact words. He was very calm about it." He paused. "Eli doesn't really do things the way you expect him to." "Ivy either," Celeste said. They sat with that for a moment. It was not an uncomfortable silence. That was the thing about it. It should have been. They barely knew each other. They were in a hospital waiting room. They were both carrying enough grief and fatigue to fill several waiting rooms. But it wasn't. It was just a silence, the ordinary kind, the kind that exists between people who have decided, without discussing it, that they don't need to fill every available air with words. Celeste thought about Marcus. Not painfully, the way she usually did. That sudden drop in the stomach when something reminded her, and the reminder came in sideways before she'd had time to prepare. Just a quiet acknowledgement, the way you acknowledge weather. He would have liked this man. He would have found Nolan's coffee cup pragmatism funny. Marcus had been funny about things like that, small domestic disasters elevated by the right delivery. She looked down at her phone. An email from her VP of Operations, Dean Pritchard, with the subject line cryocell integration, update needed. She opened it. "Celeste." Vanthorpe called again. "They're getting impatient with the timeline. Mitchell thinks we should bring the hardware team in for a second review before Thursday's presentation. I've got concerns about the temperature variance data from last week's run. Can we talk at 2? She read it twice. The cryocell project was Halcyon's flagship, 3 years of development, a proprietary cell preservation system designed for transport of tissue samples in rural and low-infrastructure medical environments. It was, if the final testing held, going to change how certain categories of diagnostic medicine worked in places that currently had no reliable cold chain infrastructure. It was also, at this particular moment, running about 11 weeks behind its projected timeline, burning through contingency budget, and being watched by the board with the focused attention of people who had approved a substantial investment and were beginning to have questions. She typed back, 2 works. Flag anything from Vanthorpe in the meantime. She put the phone away. She was aware that she had just made a choice to put the phone away, and that this choice was small and probably nothing but felt, in the context of the last 8 months, slightly unusual. What do you do? Nolan asked. Not nosily. The kind of question you ask when you've been sitting beside someone for a while and the alternatives are silence or something more personal, and you're not quite ready for more personal. Medical technology, Celeste said. I run a company called Halcyon MedTech. We develop diagnostic and preservation equipment, mostly for clinical environments. Nolan nodded slowly. I've heard of them, he said. Not sure from where. We're not a household name. We do a lot of B2B work. She paused. What about you? Refrigeration technician, he said. Commercial and industrial. I've got a service contract with about 30 clients across the metro. Restaurants, medical facilities, cold storage distribution. He said it plainly, the way you state a fact that is exactly what it is and requires no apology or elevation. I've been doing it for 11 years. Good work, Celeste said. Not the kind of good work you say when you're being polite. The kind you say when you actually mean it, when you understand what it means for cold chains to function correctly and what happens in medical settings when they don't. Nolan glanced at her briefly, as though calibrating whether she meant it. Apparently he decided she did. It pays, he said. When the business is running. Took some time off when Lauren was sick, and again after, and now with Eli's schedule. He stopped. It's manageable, he said, which was the word people used when something was being held together with the functional equivalent of tape and goodwill, and they didn't want to make it anyone else's problem. Celeste understood manageable. She had been describing her own life with that word for 2 years. She didn't say this. Instead, she said, Eli's cast comes off in 6 weeks? 5.5, Nolan said. The fractures were, he came off his bike badly, hit a drainage grate on Castor Street. 3 separate fractures, 2 of them clean, 1 complicated. The surgical team was good, but the rehab is going to take time. He looked at Eli, who was now asking Ivy something about her sketchbook, leaning forward in his transport chair with the slightly bossy curiosity of a child who has decided to be interested in what you're doing. He hates sitting still, Nolan said. Always has. Lauren used to say he came out running and hasn't stopped since. Ivy was like that, Celeste said. Before. She heard the word land and didn't try to take it back. She's different now. She's still. She's there. She's fully there. But she's quieter. More internal. She watches things instead of doing them. That's not necessarily bad, Nolan said. No, Celeste agreed. It's not. She thought about it. It's just different from who she was. And I spend a lot of time. I don't know if I should be trying to get the old Ivy back or if there's a new Ivy that's just hers. And I don't know which one I'm trying to help. She hadn't said that to anyone before. She hadn't even said it to Dr. Ortega in quite those words. Nolan was quiet for a moment. Eli laughs differently now, he said finally. I don't know how to explain it. It's still his laugh, but there's something underneath it, a second beat, like he's checking something every time. He turned his coffee cup a half rotation on the table. You start to feel like you know every version of your kid's laugh, and then something happens and there's one you've never heard before, and you don't know if you're supposed to fix it or just learn it. Celeste looked at him. He was looking at the middle distance, at nothing in particular. Yeah, she said. That was all. Just yeah. But it was enough. The nurse appeared in the doorway and called Eli Pierce. Nolan stood, took the handles of the transport chair, and maneuvered it toward the door with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this many times. Eli waved to Ivy with a backward flip of his hand. Ivy raised her pencil in return. Tuesday, Nolan said to Celeste as he passed. Tuesday, she confirmed. What? There were 4 more Tuesdays before anything changed. 4 more hospital mornings. 4 more waiting room conversations that started at safe distances and arrived at less safe ones by degrees, the way most real conversations do. The third Tuesday, Nolan brought 2 coffees. He handed one to Celeste without comment, and she took it without making it a thing, and they both understood that something had shifted by exactly that much. The fourth Tuesday, Ivy showed Eli her sketchbook. Not because anyone asked her to, she slid it off her lap and held it out to him with both hands, an offering, and Eli took it with the seriousness the gesture deserved and went through it page by page, narrating his opinions on each drawing with the unfiltered honesty of a 10-year-old who hasn't yet learned to couch his feedback. This one's good. This one I don't get. Is this a dog or a cloud? It's good either way. This one's my favorite. What's this? That's the hospital elevator, Ivy said. Eli looked at it. Why is it crying? Ivy thought about it. Because of the lids, she said. There was a pause. Then Eli started laughing. Loud, uncomplicated, hospital waiting room, inappropriate laughter. And Ivy's small, almost smile broke into something wider and more real, and Nolan caught Celeste's eye across the row of chairs, and they both looked away quickly, because whatever that moment was, it was too much to hold directly. The fifth Tuesday was a Thursday, because Dr. Ortega's schedule had shifted and they'd rearranged, and Celeste had texted Nolan. They had exchanged numbers somewhere between the third and fourth Tuesdays, for scheduling purposes, she had told herself, to let him know. He texted back, works for us. Eli has PT Thursday afternoons anyway. And that was how Hospital Tuesdays became Hospital Thursdays. And then, gradually, something that was not limited to hospitals at all. It started with a practical suggestion. Celeste had noticed, during one of their waiting room conversations, that Nolan was doing his service calls in a geographic pattern that made no mechanical sense. Driving across town to a client on the east side, then back across to the medical district, then out again to the north corridor. She'd mentioned it, not as a criticism, just as an observation, the way she'd mention an inefficient process flow at Halcyon. He'd looked at her with the expression of someone who has been living inside a problem too long to see it clearly. If you cluster the east side clients on Mondays and Wednesdays, you're cutting your drive time by roughly a third, she said. Which at your fuel and labor rate, how do you know my fuel and labor rate? I don't exactly. I'm estimating based on what commercial service contracts run in this metro. He stopped. That's pretty close, actually. Route optimization is a logistics problem, she said. We deal with them at Halcyon. Distribution chains for medical equipment it's the same underlying math, she paused. I can draw it out if that's useful. You'd draw out my service route. I'd draw out the route structure. You'd apply it. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. Something between surprised and something else. Something she didn't try to name. Yeah, he said. Okay. She drew it out on the back of a billing statement he had in his jacket pocket, using a pen from Ivy's pouch, and he studied it with the focused attention of someone who works with physical systems and understands immediately when a solution has internal logic. He asked 2 questions, one about a client who needed early morning access, one about a service call that ran long, and she adjusted the model, and that was that. The following Monday he texted, saved 40 minutes and $11 in fuel. Should have done this 2 years ago. She wrote back, $11 is $11. He sent back a single period, which she decided was his version of laughing. It was around this time, the 6th week of Tuesdays and Thursdays, or what had become Thursdays, and now occasionally a Saturday morning walk in Alderman Park, because Eli needed outdoor time with his newly cast-free leg, which had come off on schedule and been revealed to contain a perfectly healed set of fractures and a limb that Eli immediately tried to use to climb a park bench. That Celeste began to notice something about the way her house sounded when she got home from these outings. Not different, exactly. The quiet was still there, but it had a slightly different quality on the evenings after she'd spent time with Nolan and Eli. Like the silence had been aired out a little. She noticed it. She didn't analyze it. Analysis was something she did with data and processes and quarterly projections. This was not any of those things. What she did analyze, with the meticulous attention she brought to things that were threatening to slip past her, was Ivy. Because Ivy was changing, not dramatically. There were no sudden breakthroughs, no Tuesday where she arrived at the hospital talking in full paragraphs about everything she'd held back for 2 years. It was slower than that, smaller. She spoke to Eli with a growing ease that accumulated increment by increment, the way a path through a field gets worn into grass. Not all at once, just by the same feet going the same way enough times. By week 4, Eli called her Ives, which no one had ever called her, and Ivy did not correct him, which meant she didn't mind it, which meant something had been decided about the nature of this friendship that neither of them had bothered to announce. She spoke to Nolan a little, too. Not with the same ease she'd found with Eli. Nolan was an adult, and the inhibitory response that Dr. Randall had mentioned with such clinical detachment was real. Celeste knew it was real because she'd watched it operate on Ivy's face for 2 years, the way the child would gather herself at the approach of adult speech, like a creature preparing for something loud. But she spoke. She answered when Nolan asked her things, simple things, careful things, the questions of a man who understood from experience how much damage the wrong kind of attention could do. "What color's this one?" Nolan asked one Thursday, about a drawing in Ivy's sketchbook. "I'm calling it November Gray," Ivy said. He looked at it. "That's pretty accurate," he said. "I know," Ivy said. He didn't make a big deal of it. That was the thing about Nolan that Celeste had started to understand, the thing that she thought mattered more than any of the more obvious things about him. He simply didn't escalate. When Ivy spoke, he answered. When she didn't, he didn't fill the silence with encouragement or visible disappointment or any of the performing patience that well-meaning people did around mute children. The exaggerated cheerfulness that Celeste recognized as the adult version of talking too loud to someone who doesn't speak your language. He just responded, treated her like a person who had said something and to whom a response was owed. No more and no less. It was, Celeste thought, the most natural thing anyone had done around Ivy in 2 years. She told Dr. Ortega about it on a Thursday appointment. She described the hospital waiting rooms, the park, the conversations, the way Eli and Ivy had developed their own private shorthand in the way that children do when they've decided they like each other and are not going to waste time being formal about it. Dr. Ortega listened to all of it and then sat back in her chair with her hands folded and looked at Celeste with the considering expression she used when she was about to say something she'd been waiting for the right moment to say. "Ivy's been speaking in session too," she said. Celeste went still. "More?" "More and more easily. We've had 3 sessions in the last month where she initiated conversation without prompting." Dr. Ortega paused. "She talks about Eli. She talks about the park. She said Eli's dad listens right." Celeste sat with that for a moment. "Listens right," she repeated. Her words. Dr. Ortega looked at her. "Do you know what she means?" "Yes," Celeste said. "I do." Dr. Ortega was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, "There's something else I want to raise, and I want to raise it gently." Celeste looked at her. "Ivy's been drawing Marcus," Dr. Ortega said, "in her sketchbook, not for the first time, but more than before. And she's been talking to me about what she remembers about him. More specifically than she has been. Things he said, things they did together, sounds she remembers." She paused. "I think the friendship with Eli has opened something about permission, about it being possible to talk about people who aren't here without the world falling apart." Celeste's throat had tightened. "She doesn't talk to me about him," she said. "I know." Dr. Ortega's voice was careful and genuine. "And I think that's something we should work with. But I also want to ask you something, Celeste, and I want you to think about it before you answer." She paused. "What's in your house that reminds Ivy of her father?" Celeste opened her mouth. Then she closed it. "The house has been... I renovated," she said. About 6 months after. The idea was to... It felt like it would help. Clean lines, fresh space. Remove the things that were... She stopped. "What did you remove?" Celeste thought about the boxes. There were 11 of them in a climate-controlled storage unit on the west side of the city. Photographs, Marcus's books, the particular coffee mug he'd used every morning, a hoodie that Ivy had slept with for 3 months after the accident, and that Celeste had, one evening in a terrible fit of practical reasoning, gently removed and placed in a box and replaced with a soft toy. Because the hoodie was wearing thin and the seams were going, and she'd told herself she was protecting it. "A lot," she said quietly. Dr. Ortega looked at her without judgment. She's not going to find her way back to her voice by forgetting him, she said. And I think you know that. Celeste did know that. She had known it, probably, somewhere underneath the knowing, for longer than she wanted to admit. I thought I was protecting her, she said. You were, Dr. Ortega said. You were doing what felt safest in an unsurvivable moment. That's not wrong, but she's not in that moment anymore. She paused. Neither are you. Celeste drove home from that appointment in the kind of silence that is less like peace and more like a cleared space, emptied out to make room for something. She drove past the storage facility on the west side without meaning to. Or maybe meaning to, it was hard to say. She sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes. Then she drove home. That evening, after Ivy was in bed, she got out her laptop and pulled up the storage unit's catalog. She had been organized about it, of course. Every box was labeled, photographed, inventoried. That was how she'd survived it, by making it a project, making it a list, because lists have endings and grief does not. She scrolled through the catalog for a long time. Then she opened a new document and started making a different list. Not a removal list. Something more like a return. She didn't finish it that night. She wasn't ready to finish it. But she started it, and starting was different from not starting. And she saved it and closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen for a while, in the chair where Ivy ate her eggs on hospital mornings, and let herself think about Marcus in the undefended way she'd been too frightened to think about him for 2 years. His voice. The way he'd held Ivy when she was small, one hand under her head like he thought she might dissolve if he wasn't careful. The coffee mug. The hoodie. The particular laugh he'd had that was embarrassing in public because it was too loud and he'd never managed to care. The fluorescent lights of the kitchen hummed above her. She sounds nice. She does, baby, Celeste thought. She really does. And she let herself grieve him, properly, for the first time in a very long time. Not the clean, managed, containable grief she had structured for herself so that she could keep functioning, but the real kind. The kind that knows what it's lost and says so without apology. The kind that Nolan had been carrying in a cracked old phone in his jacket pocket. Present, real, refusing to be put in a box. The first box came home on a Saturday. Celeste hadn't planned it as an event. She hadn't told Ivy in advance, hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't consulted Dr. Ortega about the optimal approach, which was unusual because she consulted Dr. Ortega about most things that involved Ivy and emotional territory. She'd woken up that Saturday with the list she'd started 2 weeks ago still open on her laptop, and she'd driven to the storage facility on the west side before she had time to talk herself into a more measured timeline, and she'd come back with 1 box. Not 11. 1. She'd chosen it carefully. Box 4, according to her catalog. Marcus's books, the ones he'd actually read. Not the ones bought with intention and left unopened, but the worn ones with cracked spines and penciled margins. The ones that had lived on the nightstand and the kitchen counter. And once, famously, in the refrigerator because he'd set it down while getting orange juice and forgotten it there for 2 days. Celeste had found the refrigerator book and said something sharp about it, and Marcus had laughed that too loud laugh and said the cold probably improved the prose. She put the box on the kitchen table. She didn't open it. She made coffee and looked at it for a while. Ivy came downstairs at 7:40 in her star pajamas, saw the box, and stopped in the doorway. Celeste watched her. She didn't say anything, didn't explain, didn't preempt whatever Ivy was about to do or not do. She just held her coffee and waited, because that was what she'd been learning, slowly and with difficulty, from watching Nolan operate in his patient and non-escalating way. Ivy walked to the table. She stood beside the box and looked at the label in Celeste's handwriting. Marcus. Books. She put one hand flat on the cardboard, the way you'd put your hand on something to see if it was warm. Then she looked at Celeste. Can I open it? She asked. Yeah, Bug, Celeste said. It's yours too. Ivy pulled the tape back with careful fingers. She looked inside for a moment. Then she reached in and lifted out the top book. A battered paperback history of American infrastructure that Marcus had been reading the month before the accident. A book Celeste had found annoying because he kept reading passages aloud at dinner, and she hadn't understood why he found drainage systems so interesting, and held it in both hands. She opened it to a random page. She ran her finger down the margin where Marcus had written something in pencil. She couldn't read his handwriting. He'd had a doctor's handwriting, compressed and idiosyncratic. But she traced the marks anyway, This evidence of her father's thinking, his presence in the room before she entered it. Celeste put her coffee down. She crossed to the table and stood beside Ivy and looked at the margin note with her. She couldn't read it either, which would have frustrated her at any other time. Right now it seemed appropriate. There were things about Marcus they would never recover, and maybe the illegible margin notes were the right object for that. He wrote in all of them, Celeste said. I used to yell at him about it. Ivy looked up at her. Why? Because they were library books. Ivy looked back at the page. A beat passed. Then she made a sound that was almost, not quite, but almost, a laugh. Celeste sat down at the kitchen table and did not cry. It took some work. She told Nolan about the box the following Thursday, in the hospital parking garage, while Eli and Ivy walked ahead of them at Eli's newly liberated cast-free pace, which was somewhere between a walk and a controlled fall, his right leg still not entirely trusting the ground, but refusing to behave like it wasn't. Ivy stayed close to him, not holding his arm, just positioned slightly to his right in the way a person positions themselves when they want to be available without making it obvious. She laughed, Celeste said. Almost. It was the closest thing to it in 2 years. Nolan looked at her. About the library books? About the library books. He was quiet for a moment. What did you do when she did it? I sat down, Celeste said, and did not visibly fall apart. That's the job, he said. It's exhausting. Yeah, he said. It is. They walked for a moment in silence, watching Eli narrate something to Ivy with the full use of his hands, which he deployed like an air traffic controller, wide and emphatic. We started keeping Lauren's phone charged, Nolan said. He set it to the middle distance, not to Celeste specifically, the way you say things you've been carrying for a while that need to be said in the direction of something that isn't a face. The one with the recordings. Eli started asking to hear them again. Not all the time, just sometimes. Before a hard thing. Before the first day of school last year. Before the surgery. He paused. I used to worry about it. Whether it was keeping him from moving forward or whatever the expected trajectory is supposed to look like. What do you think now? I think forward isn't a direction away from her, he said. I think we just take her with us. Celeste thought about this. About the box in her kitchen, which had been joined by a second box the following weekend. Photographs, framed and unframed. And the small project of deciding which ones to put back on the walls and where. She'd let Ivy choose. Ivy had made her selections with the gravity of a curator, carrying each frame to a wall and holding it up and looking at it for a long time before deciding. The one she'd chosen for the hallway was a photo from a camping trip 3 years ago. Marcus with Ivy on his shoulders, both of them looking at something out of frame, Ivy's hand on top of her father's head for balance, laughing at whatever they were seeing. Celeste had walked past it every morning since. She had not yet managed to walk past it without stopping. She's putting him back, Celeste said quietly. Ivy is. She's putting him back in the house. Good, Nolan said, simple and without qualification. I should have done it sooner, Celeste said. You did it when you could, he said. He wasn't letting her off the hook. She could hear that, the slight friction in it. But he was also not giving her the indulgence of extended self-reproach. You did it when you could, period. Get on with it. She found this bracing in the way that cold water is bracing. Not comfortable, useful. The cryocell project had not improved. Celeste knew, walking into Halcyon's main conference room on a gray Wednesday in October, that she was walking into a room full of people who had done their best and were arriving at the conclusion that their best was not going to be sufficient. She could tell from the emails. She could tell from the way Dean Pritchard had sounded on the phone that morning, careful, measured, the voice of a man organizing how to deliver news he's been holding for a few days. The room held 9 people. Her hardware lead, Gavin Torres. Her product manager, Sasha Kim. 2 members of the thermal engineering team, Brendan Lake and Yolanda Frazier. Dean. 2 representatives from Vanthorpe, the distribution partner who had committed to a first-wave rollout of the cryocell units across a set of rural hospital systems in 3 states. And Dr. Roland Vanthorpe himself, the company's founder, a man in his mid-70s who wore reading glasses on a chain and had a manner that was permanently 3 degrees warmer than necessary, which Celeste had learned to read as the social style of someone who liked to keep you feeling friendly right up until the moment they said something serious. He said something serious 7 minutes into the meeting. Celeste, I want to be direct with you because I think that's what this relationship deserves. He folded his hands on the conference table. We've pushed our commitment window twice. Our hospital partners have been patient because the technology promises are real and the clinical applications are genuinely important, and we believe in what Halcyon is building here. But I have 3 hospital network administrators asking me, in writing, for a confirmed delivery date, and I don't have one to give them. Celeste nodded. I understand that. The temperature variance data from the last test run. I've seen it, she said. Then you know what we're looking at. She did know. The cryocell units were designed to maintain a precise internal temperature within a ½ degree Celsius range during transport across variable external conditions. The last test run, simulating transport conditions in a high-humidity summer environment, had shown variance spikes at the 40-minute mark in 3 of the 7 units tested. Not catastrophic, the samples would have remained viable, but outside the system's own specified tolerances, which meant outside the regulatory filing's specified parameters, which meant not approvable in its current state. Gavin Torres walked through the data. He was a good engineer, methodical, accurate, not inclined to soften findings, and his presentation of the variance problem was precise and unhelpful in exactly the way accurate presentations of unfixable problems tend to be. The team had tried 4 different approaches to the thermal regulation loop over the past 8 months. None of them had held under the 40-minute stress condition. The physics of the problem, as Gavin presented them, suggested a fundamental tension in the unit's current architecture that might require redesigning a core component, which would mean another 6 to 9 months of development, minimum. Celeste listened to all of it. She asked questions. She did not let her face do anything that would make the room more anxious than it already was, which was considerable. At the end of the technical portion, Dr. Vanthorpe looked at her across the table. What's your assessment? My assessment, Celeste said, is that the problem is real and the team has been working it honestly, and the solutions we've tried have been reasonable and haven't worked. She paused. I don't think 9 months is acceptable. I think we need a different approach. What approach? Sasha asked. Celeste looked at Gavin. Walk me through the 40-minute failure point again, specifically the thermal regulation loop architecture. Gavin pulled up the diagram. He walked through it. He'd walked through it, Celeste suspected, about 40 times in the last 3 months, and the fatigue of a problem that refuses to yield was visible in the way he moved through the explanation. Still precise, but with the slightly hollow quality of someone who has stopped expecting the explanation to produce a solution. She looked at the diagram for a long time. Something was bothering her. Not something new, something familiar, something she'd seen before in a different context. She stayed with the feeling while Gavin finished his summary, while Dean started talking about contingency timelines, while one of the Vanthorpe representatives asked about regulatory flexibility, which was a question about whether the government would accept substandard performance tolerances if you asked politely enough, and the answer to that was no, categorically no, which Celeste stated without particular emphasis. She was still looking at the diagram when the meeting ended. On Thursday, she was distracted, and Nolan noticed. He noticed because he was the kind of person who noticed things about people without announcing that he was doing it, a quality she'd observed in him from the early hospital mornings, the way he took in a room before positioning himself in it, the way he listened slightly past the end of a sentence, waiting to see if there was more. He didn't say anything during the walk from the parking garage to the waiting room. He got coffees from a different cafe, one on the ground floor of a building across the street that had lids which actually performed their intended function, a discovery they'd made on a rainy Tuesday 6 weeks ago, and handed her one and sat down and didn't ask her anything, which was, she had come to understand, his way of making space. She lasted about 4 minutes. We have an engineering problem, she said, at Halcyon, the flagship project. How bad? Bad enough that our distribution partner is starting to say very polite things that mean they're considering walking away. He made a sound that was not quite a word, a sound of genuine comprehension, not sympathy performance. The physics are... She stopped. You know what? It doesn't matter. You don't need the details. I wasn't going to pretend I could solve your... No, I know. I just... She stopped again, tried to locate what she actually wanted to say. I keep looking at the thermal regulation diagram, and feeling like I've seen the problem somewhere before and I can't place it. It's like, what does the diagram look like? Nolan asked. She looked at him. Why? He lifted one shoulder. Because sometimes talking through what you're seeing helps you see it. She pulled out her phone. She had the diagram in her files. She'd been looking at it, off and on, for 2 days. She pulled it up and handed him the phone. He looked at it for a moment. He tilted the phone slightly, examining the architecture from a different angle. He had the focused, physical attention of someone accustomed to looking at systems and reading them for function rather than theory. This is a thermal loop, he said. Yes. For maintaining internal temperature in a medical transport unit, tissue preservation, samples. The unit has to hold within 0.5 degree Celsius under variable external conditions. He nodded slowly. And where's it failing? 40 minutes in, under high humidity, high heat stress simulation. The variance spikes here. She leaned over and pointed at the section of the diagram. Her finger was close to his hand. She kept her attention on the screen. He looked at where she was pointing. He was quiet for a long moment. He turned the phone again. Your bypass is in the wrong place, he said. She looked at him. What? He pointed at the diagram, specifically at the thermal bypass valve, which existed to redirect the regulation loop when external temperature exceeded a certain threshold. This bypass, it's triggering based on external temperature reading, but in a high humidity environment, the humidity is affecting the external sensor reading before the actual thermal load hits the internal system. So the bypass is triggering early, based on bad data, which means when the real thermal stress arrives 40 minutes in, the system's already in bypass mode and it can't compensate. He paused. You need the bypass trigger on an internal sensor, not external, or a dual sensor verification before bypass activates. Celeste stared at the diagram. She stared at it for a long time. The conference room. Gavin's presentation. 8 months of iterative solutions. All of them focused on the compensation mechanism, the regulation capacity, the thermal material specs. None of them, not one, had questioned the bypass trigger logic, because the bypass trigger logic was based on a sensor reading, and no one had asked whether the sensor was reading the right thing. The humidity, she said. It came out slightly strange, her voice, like something had shifted in the room and she was recalibrating. The humidity is corrupting the external sensor read. I see it with refrigeration units all the time, Nolan said. He was still looking at the diagram, matter of fact, the way you are about problems in your own field. High humidity environments, commercial kitchens, food storage near coastal areas, outdoor staging. The external sensors drift. You can't trust a single external read for bypass logic in those conditions. It's a known issue in commercial refrigeration. We always use dual sensor verification or internal primary switching. Celeste was already reaching for her phone. She opened a new message to Gavin Torres. She wrote, Change of direction. Need to look at bypass trigger logic, specifically whether external sensor read is being corrupted by humidity load before thermal stress reaches internal system. Can you model dual sensor bypass verification? Call me when you see this. She sent it. She looked up. Nolan was handing her phone back to her, his expression unchanged, as though he hadn't just walked into a problem that 8 engineers had been failing to solve for 8 months, and spotted the core issue in 90 seconds by looking at a diagram on someone else's phone. You do this regularly? She said. Just see things like that? In refrigeration systems, he said. I don't know anything about your specific technology. The principle is the same. I figured it probably was, he said. He took a drink of his coffee. You going to call them? I'm going to call them, she said. I need... She was already half standing, and she caught herself and sat back down. Ivy was still with Eli across the row of chairs, working on something in the sketchbook together. Eli had apparently taken up drawing, by which he meant he drew things and announced what they were before anyone had time to guess incorrectly. She couldn't leave yet. Go, Nolan said. I'll stay with them. You don't need to... Celeste. He looked at her, patient, even. Go make your call. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stood and walked to the corridor outside the waiting room and called Gavin Torres, who picked up on the second ring and said, I just saw your message and I need you to say it again because I think I missed something the first time. She said it again. She said it in the technical language she shared with Gavin, all the specificities she'd been careful not to use with Nolan because it wasn't his framework. She heard the silence on Gavin's end that meant he was looking at the same diagram she had been looking at and arriving, step by step, at the same awful and obvious realization. The external sensor, Gavin said. He said it the way you say something when you've been inside a problem so long you've stopped being able to see its outside edge. We never questioned the external sensor. I know, Celeste said. Neither did I. How did you? Gavin started. Dual sensor bypass verification, she said. Model it. Internal primary switching as a secondary option. Give me a timeline by morning. She hung up and stood in the corridor for a moment, her back against the wall and her phone in her hand, looking at the ceiling. 11 months. That's how long the cryocell project had been stalled on this particular problem. 11 months of iterations and tests and proposals and meetings and calls with Dr. Vanthorpe's people, and the gentle accumulating pressure of a product that was supposed to change something real about how medicine moved through under-resourced places. And the thing that had been blocking it was a sensor trigger assumption that a refrigeration technician with no relevant credentials had spotted in 90 seconds because he'd seen the same basic failure in a restaurant walk-in cooler. She went back to the waiting room. Nolan was in his usual chair. Ivy and Eli were still at the sketchbook. Ivy was showing Eli how to draw something, holding his hand slightly to guide the pencil, in the manner of a child who has appointed herself an instructor and is taking the responsibility seriously. Eli was submitting to instruction with the patience of someone who has decided the goal is worth the process. Celeste sat back down. She looked at Nolan. The team's going to model it tonight, she said. He nodded. If the model holds, we're looking at a solution timeline of 6 to 8 weeks instead of 9 months. He nodded again. He didn't make it a big thing. He didn't seem to expect her to make it a big thing either. Thank you, she said. I just looked at a diagram, he said. Nolan. She said it quietly, but with the directness she used for things she needed to be heard clearly. You just looked at a problem that my entire engineering team has been working on for 11 months and identified the root cause in under 2 minutes. You don't have to minimize that. He was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup on the table, that half rotation he did when he was processing something. I know the systems, he said finally. I've been working them since I was 22. I know what breaks and why, and what it looks like when engineers design something without accounting for real-world conditions. He paused. Commercial refrigeration isn't glamorous work, but the problems are real, and they don't care about your theory. They break on you at 3 in the morning at a restaurant, and you fix them. Or 40 pounds of fish goes bad, and someone loses money and maybe a job. He stopped. Something moved in his face that she couldn't fully read. I've just never been in a room where anyone thought what I know was worth asking about. Celeste looked at him. He wasn't saying it with bitterness, which made it worse somehow. The absence of bitterness. The clean, factual statement of a person who had arrived at an accurate assessment of how the world had been valuing him. That should change, she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze and didn't look away and didn't soften it into a pleasantry, because it wasn't one. She meant it with the directness of someone who had just watched an 11-month problem evaporate in 90 seconds and was not interested in pretending otherwise. Before he could respond, Ivy appeared at Celeste's elbow, sketchbook in hand, and held it out. It was a new drawing. Eli's contribution was visible in one corner, a large unidentified shape that might have been a dog or a helicopter or both. But the center of the page was Ivy's, 2 figures sitting in chairs with coffee cups, drawn in November gray and a pale yellow, their lines simple and unpolished and entirely recognizable. Celeste looked at it. She looked at the 2 small figures in their chairs with their cups. Is this us? She asked. Ivy looked at her with her father's patient dark eyes. Obviously, she said. Nolan made a sound, not quite a laugh, but close. Yeah. Gavin called at 6:40 the next morning. Celeste was in the kitchen with her second coffee, and the photograph in the hallway still doing what it always did when she walked past it, and she picked up before the second ring. The model holds, Gavin said. He sounded like he hadn't slept. He also sounded like the specific kind of exhausted that comes after a night of work that turned out to matter. Dual sensor verification. We ran 6 simulations across the temperature and humidity variables, and the variance spikes don't appear. Not once. Not a single one. Celeste put her coffee cup down very carefully. We need to build the prototype with the modified trigger logic, Gavin continued. Physical testing will take 3 weeks. Realistically, 4. But Celeste, I think this is it. I think this is actually it. Build it, she said. Full team priority. I'll call Vanthorpe. Who figured it out? Gavin asked. You said you'd explain when we knew if it held. She looked at the photograph in the hallway. Marcus and Ivy on the camping trip, both of them looking at something out of frame. Someone who knows how things break, she said. I'll tell you the rest later. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen with the morning light coming through the window above the sink and the photograph visible from where she stood and the quiet of the house around her. The quiet that had a different quality now, more aired out, more inhabited by things that were allowed to be there. She thought about what Nolan had said. I've just never been in a room where anyone thought what I know was worth asking about. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the Halcyon organizational structure, the job categories, the engineering and field technician classifications. She looked at them for a long time with the focused, problem-assessing attention she brought to diagrams and org charts, and anything that had a structure that could be examined and improved. Then she opened a new document. Not a list this time, something more like a proposal. She called it, for the time being, simply Field Engineering, Rethink. She didn't finish it that morning. She had calls with Vanthorpe to make, and Ivy to get ready for school, and a Thursday afternoon coming up that she was going to be honest with herself about this, looking forward to with an uncomplicated anticipation that she hadn't felt toward a Thursday afternoon in a very long time. But she started it, the document, the rethink. She was getting better at starting things. The prototype passed its first physical test on a Tuesday. Gavin sent the results at 11:40 at night, which meant he'd been in the lab until midnight, which was not unusual for Gavin during a critical test window, but which Celeste noted anyway, because she intended to do something about the culture of midnight work at Halcyon once this particular fire was out. The email had no subject line. The body was 3 words, 6 for 6. Celeste read it sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark, and did not whoop or pump her fist or do any of the things she might have done in a different version of herself. She just sat with it for a moment, the quiet confirmation of something she had believed since the morning Gavin had called to say the model held. Then she typed back, "Go home, sleep, call me at 8. Then she put her phone face down on the nightstand and lay back and stared at the ceiling with the particular quality of alertness that comes after sustained tension releases. Not quite relaxation, more like the body's confusion about what it's supposed to be doing now that the thing it was braced for has resolved. She thought about Nolan. She thought about a diagram on a phone in a hospital waiting room. She thought about dual sensor bypass verification and the 40-minute failure point and 11 months of intelligent people working a problem from the wrong angle. And she thought about what it meant that the right angle had come from a person who had never been in a room where anyone thought his knowledge was worth asking about. She thought about the document on her laptop. Field Engineering, Rethink. She'd been adding to it in pieces over the past 3 weeks, in the margins of other work, the way you add to something that you're not ready to formalize yet but can't stop thinking about. It was 17 pages now. That was probably enough pages to stop calling it a rethink and start calling it a proposal. She fell asleep at 12:50 and woke up at 5:15, and that was fine. That was just how mornings worked. Gavin called at 8:03. He sounded like someone who had slept for 6 hours and was pretending it had been 8. Full stress protocol results come back Thursday, he said, but the 6 for 6 on the initial run means the underlying fix is sound. The variant spikes are gone. Internal primary switching with dual sensor confirmation. It's holding clean across all the humidity variables. Walk me through the failure modes, Celeste said. She was in the kitchen, coffee in hand, Ivy's cereal bowl on the counter in front of her with the spoon still in it, Ivy having departed for school 18 minutes ago in the particular focused silence she brought to Monday mornings. Gavin walked her through them. There were 2 minor recalibration needs, threshold sensitivities on the secondary sensor, and 1 material substitution on the bypass valve housing that added a small per unit cost that would need to be reviewed against the production budget. None of it was problematic. All of it was manageable, which now meant something different than it had meant a month ago, because manageable had acquired a functional definition again instead of a survival one. Get me the full Thursday results as soon as they're certified, Celeste said. I'm calling Vanthorpe today to update the timeline. If Thursday holds, I want to give them a confirmed delivery window before end of week. Understood. A pause. Celeste. Who was it? You said you'd tell me. She had said that. She'd been saying later for 3 weeks and later had arrived. His name is Nolan Pierce, she said. He's a commercial refrigeration technician. He's been servicing cold chain equipment for 11 years. He looked at our bypass diagram for about 90 seconds. The silence on Gavin's end was the particular silence of an engineer processing information that conflicts with his existing framework. He's not on our team, Gavin said finally. No. He just looked at it. He recognized the humidity sensor drift problem from his own field. It's apparently a known issue in commercial refrigeration units operating in high humidity environments. The fix is standard practice in that industry. She let this sit for a moment. Which is information we didn't have because we didn't have anyone on the team who works in that field. Another silence. Gavin was a good engineer and a self-aware enough person to hear what she was actually saying. Okay, he said. Thursday, she said. Get me clean results. She hung up and called Dr. Van Thorpe's office. His assistant put her through in 4 minutes, which was faster than usual, which meant Van Thorpe had left instructions. Celeste. His voice had the 3 degrees warmer than necessary quality, but underneath it today there was something more attentive. He'd been waiting for this call. I hope you have news worth having. 6 for 6 on the initial prototype test, she said. Full stress protocol results Thursday. If they hold, and I believe they will, I can give you a confirmed delivery window by Friday. The silence that followed was brief and had a specific texture. The texture of a man choosing not to show relief too quickly. That's a significant change from 3 weeks ago, he said. It is, she confirmed. What changed? We found the root cause, she said. The bypass trigger logic was responding to a corrupted sensor read in high humidity conditions. We've corrected it. The fix is structurally sound and the test results support that. How did you find it? She looked at the photograph in the hallway. Marcus and Ivy, looking at something out of frame. Someone looked at our problem from outside our framework, she said, and saw what we'd stopped being able to see. Van Thorpe made a sound of genuine interest. I'd like to hear more about that when we meet, he said. I have a particular appreciation for solutions that come from unexpected directions. So do I, Celeste said. I'm developing one. The Thursday results came back clean. 7 for 7 on the full stress protocol, across every humidity and temperature variable in the testing matrix. Gavin sent the certified report at 3:17 in the afternoon and followed it with a phone call in which he said, without preamble, "We're done. It's done. It's going to work." Celeste was in her office when the call came. She stood at her window for a moment after hanging up, looking at the city, at the specific ordinary chaos of an afternoon in motion, traffic and pedestrians and the gray October sky doing what October skies do in this part of the country. And she allowed herself, for approximately 45 seconds, to feel the full weight of what the past 11 months had been and what it meant that they were over. Then she called Van Thorpe, confirmed the delivery window, and scheduled the meeting he'd asked for. Then she opened the field engineering, rethink document, and added 4 more pages. She didn't tell Nolan about the Thursday results immediately. Not because she was keeping it from him. She wasn't. It wasn't a secret. But because Thursday was also a hospital day, and the hospital day had its own gravity, and she had learned not to bring the weight of Halcyon into those hours if she could help it. That time had become, she didn't have a precise word for it, necessary. Not in a romantic way, or not only in a romantic way, but in the way that certain things become load-bearing in your life without your having designated them as such. What she did tell him, standing in the parking garage after the appointment while Ivy and Eli investigated a crack in the concrete wall with the focused scientific attention of 2 children who have decided this crack is interesting, was that the tests had passed and the project was going forward. He looked at her. The sensor fix held? 7 for 7, she said. He nodded. That was it, just a nod, the same unperformative response he gave to most things. But something in his eyes was different. Something that wasn't quite pride but was adjacent to it. The look of a person who has been told that something they did mattered and is quietly deciding how to hold that. Gavin wants to know if you'd be willing to come in, Celeste said. Not for anything formal, just to talk through the refrigeration principles. He has some questions about real-world cold chain behavior that he'd like to understand better before the production run. Nolan's expression shifted slightly. Come in where? Halcyon, our facility. She said it plainly without dressing it up. You don't have to, but the offer is genuine. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him doing the calculation she'd watched him do before. Not a distrustful calculation, more the calculation of a person who has learned to check the gap between what's offered and what's actually meant before stepping into it. I don't have a degree, he said. I should say that up front. I know that, Celeste said. Gavin has 3. He still couldn't see what you saw. Something moved in Nolan's jaw. He looked at his son, who had now explained to Ivy his theory about the crack's structural significance, a theory Ivy appeared to be evaluating with appropriate scientific rigor. Yeah, he said. Okay. He came on a Friday morning, after his first service call of the day, a walk-in cooler at a catering company on the north side. He'd mentioned it in a text the night before almost as context, the way you mention logistics to someone who has become part of your regular coordination, and arrived at Halcyon's facility at 10:15 in his work truck, which he'd apparently debated parking in the visitor lot before deciding the visitor lot was correct. Celeste met him in the lobby. He was in his work clothes, dark pants, a gray thermal Henley under his company jacket, Pierce refrigeration embroidered on the chest. And he looked at the lobby with the same taking-in-the-room attention he brought to new spaces, assessing it without being dazzled by it, which was the right response to a lobby that had been designed by someone with an opinion about what medical technology companies should communicate to the world. Nice building, he said. It's a lot of glass, Celeste said. Glass is expensive. It is. She'd had the same thought when the architect presented the design. She'd approved it anyway because the board liked it, and she'd had bigger things to fight for. Gavin's in the engineering lab on 3. I'll take you up. Gavin Torres met them at the lab door. He was 34 and built like someone who had been an athlete in another life and still occasionally ran half marathons as a form of punishment. And he had the manner of an engineer who is excellent at his work and knows it and has mostly made peace with the fact that this is not the same as knowing everything. He shook Nolan's hand with the genuine attention of someone who has been genuinely surprised by something and wants to understand how it happened. The bypass diagram, Gavin said, without small talk. When you looked at it, what were you actually seeing? Walk me through it. Nolan looked at him for a moment, reading the question, checking that it was straight. You want the refrigeration perspective. I want to understand how you got there so fast, Gavin said. We had 8 people on this for 11 months. I want to know what you saw that we didn't. Nolan pulled a stool up to the workbench where Gavin had laid out the cryocell schematic, printed large. He looked at it the way he'd looked at it on the phone, that same physical systems reading attention. He started talking. He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about commercial refrigeration systems and the specific failure modes that appeared in high humidity environments. He talked about the gap between engineering theory and field behavior, the way a system that tests perfectly in a controlled environment starts doing things the manual didn't anticipate once you put it in a restaurant kitchen in August. He talked about sensor drift and bypass logic and the practical field solutions that the commercial refrigeration industry had developed over decades of things breaking at 3 in the morning in ways that textbooks hadn't predicted. Gavin listened with the full attention quality of a person receiving information he recognizes as valuable. He asked questions, good questions, the kind that move understanding forward rather than performing it. Yolanda Frazier came in partway through and pulled up a stool and started taking notes on her tablet without asking permission, which was how Yolanda operated and which no one questioned. Celeste stood at the edge of the group and watched. She watched Nolan explain field behavior with the accumulated specificity of 11 years of problem-solving in real conditions. She watched Gavin and Yolanda receive this information and integrate it with their existing technical framework in the visible, absorptive way of people who are learning something they needed. She watched Nolan answer a question from Yolanda about pressure differential monitoring in transport units with a precision that made Yolanda stop typing and say, "Wait, can you say that again?" and then type faster. At one point, Gavin pulled up a secondary diagram, the production prototype's modified schematic, and walked Nolan through the changes they'd implemented based on his insight, and Nolan looked at it and said, "You'll want to watch the secondary sensor placement in units that are going into sustained vibration transport. The mount position matters in a way that won't show up in static testing." He said it like a note in passing, not a pronouncement. Gavin immediately made a note and said, "That's the rural transport scenario, unpaved roads." Nolan said, "I don't know your specific application. I just know the vibration issue is real. Gavin said, "It's relevant, very relevant." When the session ended, Gavin walked Nolan to the elevator with the specific energy of someone who wants to keep talking but has run out of immediate questions and is already formulating the next ones. In the elevator lobby, Gavin said, "Can I call you if something comes up during the production run?" He said it straightforwardly, the way a professional asks another professional a professional question. Nolan looked at him. "Yeah," he said, "you can call." They shook hands again. Gavin went back into the lab. Celeste walked Nolan down to the lobby. They stood near the visitor's desk in the too-much-glass lobby with the October light coming through at an angle. "That was good," Nolan said. It wasn't an assessment of himself. It was an assessment of the session, the exchange, the quality of the conversation. "It was useful," Celeste said, "which is not the same thing, but they overlap today." He almost smiled. "Yolanda's going to be okay." "She's excellent," Celeste said. "She just needs more angles. We all do." She paused. "I want to talk to you about something. Not now. You have service calls this afternoon, and I have 3 meetings starting at 1. But I want to talk to you about something when we have time." He looked at her steadily. "Okay." "It's not bad," she said. "Or I don't think it's bad. I think it might be. I think it's an idea I've been working on, and I want to know what you think of it." He nodded slowly. "Saturday," he said. "Alderman Park. Eli wants to try the East Trail now that the cast's off. He'll probably hurt himself again, but in a less medically significant way." "Saturday," she said. He walked out through the glass doors to his truck. She stood in the lobby and watched him go and didn't pretend she wasn't watching because she'd run out of pretense somewhere around week 6 of Tuesdays and Thursdays and hadn't found any reason to manufacture more. Alderman Park on a Saturday in late October was the kind of cold that hadn't decided yet whether it was serious. The trees were mid-turn, oranges and rusted reds that Ivy collected visually with the focused appreciation she brought to colors, occasionally pointing at a particular leaf or the way the light hit a section of the path, without saying anything, just pointing, requiring acknowledgement. "I see it," Celeste would say. And she did see it. She was getting better at seeing things she'd been walking past. Eli had attacked the East Trail with the recovered confidence of a 10-year-old who has been physically limited for 6 weeks and has spent that time planning his return. He was about 30 yards ahead of the adults, Ivy beside him, the two of them moving at the specific speed of children who are nominally being accompanied by adults, but have tacitly agreed that the adults are a trailing condition rather than a governing one. "He's going to try to climb something," Nolan said. "Probably," Celeste agreed. "I'm choosing not to intervene in advance." "That seems right." They walked for a moment, gravel path, cold air, the distant noise of Eli explaining something to Ivy about the structural integrity of a large rock formation they were approaching. "Tell me the idea," Nolan said. Celeste had been thinking about how to say it since Thursday. She had draft versions of the explanation in her head. The formal version, the abbreviated version, the version that led with data. She discarded all of them. "Halcyon needs a field engineering function," she said. "We build medical equipment that operates in real-world conditions, transport environments, rural deployments, situations with variable humidity, and temperature and vibration, and all the physical complexity that controlled labs don't fully replicate. And we keep running into the same problem. Our engineering team understands theory and testing, but they don't have deep fluency in how things actually behave in the field." She paused. "The bypass problem is not the first time we've spent months on something that someone with field experience might have identified faster. It's probably not even in the top 5. Nolan was listening. Walking and listening, his hands in his jacket pockets. "I want to build a field engineering team," Celeste said. "People who come from trades, refrigeration, HVAC, industrial mechanics, biomedical equipment service. People who've spent their careers making things work in real conditions. Not to replace the engineering team, to sit alongside it. To be the people who ask whether the sensor is reading the right thing." Nolan didn't say anything for a moment. "And you're telling me this because," he said. Not a question exactly, more of a prompt. "Because I want you to lead it," Celeste said. The path curved slightly. They walked the curve. Ahead, Eli had reached the rock formation and was doing a preliminary assessment. Ivy was standing back watching with her arms crossed, the posture of someone who has already identified the likely outcome of this situation. I'm a refrigeration tech, Nolan said. You're someone who understands how physical systems fail in real-world conditions, Celeste said. Who can read a schematic and see what's wrong with the assumptions behind it? Who knows how to talk to engineers in ways that are useful to them? I watched Gavin's face today. He was learning. Yolanda was learning. She paused. I'm not asking you to become something you're not. I'm asking you to do what you already do, in a setting where it has more reach. I'd have to... He stopped, recalibrated. What would this actually look like, day to day? You'd carry a small team, 4 to 6 people, initially, field technicians from relevant industries, people with the same kind of applied knowledge you have. You'd work alongside the engineering team on active projects, field testing, real-world simulation, site assessments for deployment environments. You'd be the people who go where the equipment is going and tell us what we're not accounting for. She paused. I've had 17 pages of notes on this since the morning after your bypass insight. I've been building it around the shape of what you do naturally. He was quiet. They walked another 30 yards. Somewhere ahead, Eli made a sound of either triumph or injury. Ivy's voice followed, calm and assessing, which suggested triumph. My service clients, Nolan said. I have 30 accounts. I have contracts. The transition doesn't have to be immediate, Celeste said. I'd want you in a formal capacity within 60 days, but we can structure the entry to allow time to hand off your client base. She paused. I've also been thinking about an apprenticeship program for skilled tradespeople who want to move into field engineering without having to go back to school for credentials they don't need. Your client transition could potentially be handled by placing one of the program's first trainees with your accounts, someone you'd identify and train yourself. He turned his head and looked at her. It was a long look, the kind that is checking for something specific, whether the thing being offered is what it says it is, or whether there is a smaller, more contingent version hiding behind the presentation. You've thought about this a lot, he said. I think about things a lot, she said. It's a problem sometimes. It doesn't sound like a problem right now. No, she agreed. Right now it's a proposal. She met his eyes. I'm not doing this because of Thursday mornings and park walks. I'm doing it because your knowledge is genuinely, demonstrably, expensively valuable to what Halcyon builds. And that value is not currently being used, and I think that's a waste that I have the ability to do something about. She paused. Those two things can both be true at the same time. He looked away. Back to the path, back to the trees going orange and rust. They can, he said. His voice was quieter. Not uncertain, something else. The quality of a person processing the arrival of something they hadn't let themselves expect. You don't have to decide now, she said. I know. I'll send you the formal proposal document, not the 17-page thinking out loud version, a proper one. You can look at it and ask questions and decide what you want. He nodded slowly. Ahead on the trail, Eli had apparently made it to the top of the rock formation, because his voice floated back with the uninhibited triumph of a 10-year-old who has scaled something and needs this acknowledged. Dad, I'm up here. Are you seeing this? I see it, Nolan called back, without raising his voice very much. The economy of a parent who has calibrated exactly how much volume is required. Ivy said I probably shouldn't, but I did anyway. Ivy's usually right, Nolan said. There was a pause, then Eli's voice. Yeah, she usually is. Ivy, from somewhere near the base of the rock, said something too quiet to carry back to them. Then a sound that was, unmistakably, her laugh. Not an almost laugh, not the breath and almost of the kitchen table with the refrigerator book. An actual laugh, real and surprised out of her, at something Eli had done at the top of his rock that neither adult could see from where they were. Celeste stopped walking. She wasn't sure she'd fully stopped breathing. She stood on the gravel path with the October light and the orange trees and the cold air, and she listened to her daughter laugh. Her daughter's real voice, finding the shape of joy and not being afraid of it. And she did not fall apart, but it was the kind of not falling apart that costs something, that requires a decision and a lot of structural support. Nolan stopped beside her. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, close enough that she was aware of his presence with the particular awareness you have of people who have become significant to you in ways you've stopped trying to argue with. After a moment, she said, She didn't laugh like that before either. I know, he said. It's new. Yeah, he paused. It's hers, though. You can tell. She could tell. That was the thing about it. Under the newness, under the second beat he'd described that grief puts into the sounds people make, it was undeniably, completely Ivy. Her daughter's laugh, finding its way back in the form it was going to take now, shaped by everything that had happened to her, not in spite of it. Yeah, Celeste said. It's hers. They stood there a moment longer. Then Eli's voice came back down the trail. Can someone tell Ivy I'm not going to fall? She keeps looking at me like I'm going to fall. She's right to look at you like that, Nolan called. I'm not going to fall. Get down from the rock, Eli. A pause. Then the sounds of Eli descending, accompanied by narration of his own descent that suggested he was, in fact, going to be fine, but would not be willing to admit Ivy had been correct until approximately never. Celeste started walking again. Nolan fell into step beside her. Saturday's good, he said after a moment. For? For telling you I'll take the job. She looked at him. He was looking at the path ahead, at Eli now back on the ground, at Ivy standing next to him with her arms still crossed, but something relaxed in her posture now, satisfied. You haven't read the formal proposal yet, Celeste said. I know what I need to know, he said. I've known it for a while. He glanced at her. I just needed to be sure you knew it too. She understood what he meant, not just about the job, about all of it. The whole accumulating weight of Thursdays and coffee lids and sensor diagrams and park walks and boxes coming home from storage and children who were finding new versions of their own voices. I know it, she said. Okay then, he said. Ahead on the trail, Eli said something to Ivy that made her shake her head slowly, the long-suffering gesture of a 7-year-old who has decided this particular 10-year-old is her responsibility and has accepted this with the resigned affection of someone who didn't choose their family but has stopped minding how it turned out. The cold air moved through the orange trees. The path went forward into the park's interior, past the bend where the trail opened up into a wide clearing that caught the afternoon light. Celeste had been in that clearing before, years ago, with Marcus, before Ivy could walk. She had the memory without the pain of the memory, or not without the pain. With it, but carrying it differently, the way Nolan carried Lauren in a cracked phone in his jacket pocket. Present. Honest. Refusing to be somewhere other than here. She walked forward into the afternoon. The formal proposal landed in Nolan's email on a Monday morning, 48 hours after the park. He read it at his kitchen table before his first service call, still in the clothes he'd slept in, coffee going cold beside him because he kept forgetting to drink it. It was 22 pages. Not the 17-page thinking out loud version Celeste had mentioned. She had apparently thought out loud for 5 more pages between Saturday and Monday morning, which did not surprise him. The document was precise and specific in the way that things Celeste built were precise and specific, which was to say, it left very little to interpretation and a great deal to decision. Title, scope, compensation structure, transition timeline, team-building framework. The apprenticeship program outlined across 4 pages with the kind of detail that meant she'd been serious about it for longer than she'd let on. He read it twice. He made 2 notes in the margin of the printed copy he made at the office supply place on Carver Street, because he was a person who printed things he needed to think about, a habit Lauren had found endearing and slightly baffling in equal measure. One note was a question about the transition timeline for his existing clients. The other was not a question. It was a single word, yes. He sent Celeste a text at 7:48. Read it. 2 questions. Can we talk this week? She responded in 4 minutes. Wednesday. Lunch. I'll come to you. You pick the place. He picked a diner on Merchant Street that had been there since before he was born and made coffee that tasted like it understood what coffee was supposed to do and didn't have opinions about it. Celeste arrived 7 minutes late, which he had never seen her do before, and sat down across from him, slightly out of breath, and said, There was a thing with the production team and a shipping manifest, and I'm not going to talk about it because it's resolved. Okay, he said. What are the 2 questions? He asked them. The first was about the client transition, specifically whether the apprenticeship program trainee he'd be placing with his accounts would have any formal Halcyon backing or whether they'd be operating as an independent contractor. Celeste said formal backing, Halcyon would carry the liability during the transition period. He nodded. The second question was about reporting structure, who he reported to, whether it was directly to her, and whether that created a conflict given the other dimensions of their situation that they had not yet formally named, but which were sitting at the table with them as obviously as the coffee cups. Celeste looked at him when he asked it. She looked at him the way she looked at problems that deserved a straight answer. "You'd report to Dean Pritchard operationally," she said. "VP of Operations. He has the technical oversight relationship with the engineering team, and it makes structural sense. I'm the CEO. You'd report to me the way everyone reports to me." She paused. "Which means there's a layer between your daily work and whatever this is." She made a small gesture that encompassed both of them. "I think that's the right structure. I think it protects the work, and it protects us." He looked at her. "Is that what you want?" She held his gaze. "I want this to be real," she said. "Both things. I don't want one to compromise the other." A pause. "Do you?" "No," he said. "Then that's the structure," she said. He picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. The diner went about its business around them, and neither of them tried to make the moment larger than it was, which was something they had both gotten reasonably good at. "The word in the margin of page 7, Celeste said. He looked at her. "You could read my handwriting?" "I could read that one word," she said. "Your handwriting is otherwise impenetrable." Lauren said the same thing. She was right. Celeste held his eyes. "Is it still yes?" "It's still yes," he said. She nodded once, clean and certain, and that was that. Nolan's first official day at Halcyon was a Thursday in mid-November, which felt appropriate to both of them without either of them saying so. He came in with the same work jacket, Pierce refrigeration on the chest, because he didn't own business clothes, and Celeste had been specific that he should not go buy any, a directive he'd followed with some relief. Gavin met him at the lab with the energy of a person who has been given access to a resource he's been thinking about for 3 weeks and has a list. There was a list. It was on a whiteboard. Nolan looked at it for a moment, then pulled a stool up to the whiteboard and started going through it with Gavin, item by item, the way two people go through a shared problem when they've established that the other person knows what they're doing, and there's no need to perform the establishment of that fact. Celeste had a board meeting that morning. She did not go down to the lab to check. She had made a decision, in the 22 pages of the proposal and in the structure of what she'd built, that the work would stand on its own, and that her job was to create the conditions for it and then trust the people in it. This was not her natural mode. She was a person who checked. She had been checking everything for 2 years. Every appointment, every therapy session, every specialist, every morning routine, every box in storage, every grief. Checking was how she'd stayed functional. But she had learned, slowly and in pieces, that checking everything was also how you kept yourself from believing anything would hold without you. And things were holding. The cryocell production run was on schedule. Ivy was talking. Not effortlessly, not without hard days, but genuinely, with growing regularity, in sessions with Dr. Ortega, and at home and on park trails, and in the kitchen on weekend mornings when she decided she had something to say and said it. The boxes from storage were mostly home. The photograph in the hallway was doing what it had always done, and Celeste had stopped stopping in front of it and started just seeing it, present, peripheral, Marcus at the edge of her mornings the way he was supposed to be. She sat through the board meeting and answered questions about the cryocell timeline and the new field engineering function and the apprenticeship program, the last of which received the specific careful attention of board members encountering something outside their existing framework and trying to determine whether it was visionary or impractical. Celeste had anticipated this. She had prepared for it with the specificity she brought to things she believed in. The program recruits from licensed trades, she said. Refrigeration, HVAC, biomedical equipment service, industrial mechanics. These are people with 10, 15, 20 years of applied field experience. They understand how physical systems fail in real conditions. That knowledge has direct application to how we design, test, and deploy our products. Knowledge our current engineering team doesn't have because our hiring framework has never reached into those fields. She paused. The cryocell bypass issue cost us 11 months and approximately $2.3 million in delayed revenue. It was identified in 90 seconds by a commercial refrigeration technician who looked at our bypass diagram and recognized a failure mode from his own field experience. The apprenticeship program exists because I don't want to spend another 11 months on a problem that someone already knows how to solve. The board was quiet for a moment. Then one of the directors, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had been on the board since before Celeste joined Halcyon, and who had a habit of asking the questions everyone else was thinking, but had decided were too basic to ask, said, "How are you going to find these people?" "Word of mouth, initially," Celeste said. "Nolan Pierce, our new field engineering director, has 11 years of industry relationships. He knows who's good. That's how it actually works in trades. It's the same way we recruit from engineering programs, except the network is different and no one's been paying attention to it." Patricia Osei made a note. The board approved the program budget at the end of the meeting, not unanimously, but with a majority that included Patricia Osei, which Celeste counted as the margin that mattered. The cryocell launch event was scheduled for the second week of December. Van Thorpe's team had planned it at a hotel ballroom downtown, the kind of event that existed in the overlap between product announcement and industry celebration, the sort of thing that had speeches and a presentation and a room full of people from hospital networks and distribution partners and medical technology press who were there because the cryocell units represented something genuinely new in how tissue preservation could work in low-infrastructure environments, and genuinely new things in medical technology were worth a room full of people and some decent catering. Celeste had been involved in the planning the way she was involved in everything, thoroughly, with opinions. She had approved the room, the presentation materials, the speaker order, the catering, and the guest list. She had not approved one item on the original program, which was the plan to open with a 20-minute video presentation narrated by Halcyon's marketing director that would, in the marketing director's description, walk the audience through the innovation journey in a compelling and accessible format. She had replaced it with something different. She had spent a week on that replacement. She had thought about it carefully and discussed it with Dean and with Gavin, and on a Tuesday evening in Nolan's kitchen while Eli and Ivy argued quietly about the correct way to play a card game in the next room with Nolan. "I want to tell the actual story," she said, "not the brand version. The version where an 11-month problem got solved in 90 seconds by someone who wasn't in the room, and what that means about whose knowledge we've been failing to ask about." Nolan had looked at her across the kitchen table. "You want to say that at the launch event?" "Yes. In front of Van Thorpe's people. And ours. And the hospital network administrators. And the press." She paused. "I want Gavin to talk about the technical problem and the solution. I want to talk about the program, the field engineering team, the apprenticeship. I want to give the story its actual shape, not the version where a company solved its own problem internally through rigorous process." She held his gaze. "And I want you there. I want you on that stage." He was quiet. In the next room, Ivy said something sharp and precise that suggested she had identified an error in Eli's interpretation of the card game rules. And Eli said, "That's not what that means." And Ivy said, with complete serenity, "Yes, it is. Normal sounds. Household sounds. The sounds of an evening that had accumulated into something neither of them had named yet, but both of them were living in." "I'm not a public speaker," Nolan said. "I'm not asking you to give a speech," Celeste said. "I'm asking you to be there and let me tell the truth about what happened. And if you want to say something, you can, and if you don't, you don't." She paused. "You solved a $2.3 million problem by looking at a diagram for 90 seconds. The room should know who did that." He turned his coffee cup the half rotation. He did it slower than usual. "Eli's going to think this is the greatest thing that's ever happened," he said finally. "Eli is right," Celeste said. "Ivy too?" She looked at him. Something moved in her face that she didn't try to manage. "Ivy asked me last week if you were going to be at the launch," she said. "I said I was going to ask you." She said... She stopped, started again. "She said she wanted to come. She said she thought it would be good to see where I work." He looked at her. She could see the thing in his jaw, that held tension thing, and then it released, the way it did when he'd made a decision about something. "Then she should come," he said. "Yes," Celeste said. "She should." The morning of the launch was the kind of December morning that hadn't decided between overcast and clear, the sky doing something non-committal above the city as Celeste drove to the hotel. She had rehearsed her remarks. She had also, at some point in the third rehearsal, stopped rehearsing and started just thinking about what she actually wanted to say, which was different from a rehearsed speech in ways that made her slightly nervous, and which she decided was correct anyway. Ivy sat in the back seat in her good dress, dark green velvet, which she had selected herself with the same curatorial gravity she brought to wall photographs and colored pencils, and looked out the window at the city going by. She had her sketchbook on her lap. She always had her sketchbook. "Are you nervous?" Ivy asked. Celeste glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "A little," she said. "Are you?" Ivy considered. "A little," she said. "But the good kind." Celeste looked back at the road. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." The good kind. She hadn't thought to make that distinction in a long time. They met Nolan and Eli in the hotel lobby. Eli was in a button-down shirt that he had clearly been required to wear and had made his peace with, and he greeted Ivy with the handshake they'd developed somewhere in the last month. 3 pumps, a mutual nod, which Ivy returned with a solemnity that was also, if you knew where to look, the edge of a laugh. Nolan was in a jacket and tie that he wore with the posture of someone who is not uncomfortable exactly, just aware that he is wearing a jacket and tie and has chosen to accept this without complaint. "You look good," Celeste said. "I look like I'm going to a job interview," he said. "You already have the job." "That's what I keep telling myself." She almost laughed. He caught the almost laugh, and something in his eyes acknowledged it, the private frequency they'd developed over months of waiting rooms and park trails and kitchen tables. The ballroom was filling, 200 people, approximately, hospital administrators, distribution partners, 2 journalists from medical technology publications, Halcyon's team, Vanthorpe's team, a scattering of others that Celeste's assistant had managed. Round tables, a low stage, a projected backdrop with the cryocell unit's clean lines against a field-conditioned photograph. Rough road, mountains, a place where the equipment would actually go. She had chosen that photograph herself. Dr. Vanthorpe found her near the stage before the program started. He looked at the backdrop photograph, then at her. "Rural deployment site," he said. "Eastern Highlands," she confirmed. "First planned deployment under the hospital network partnership. 3 hours from the nearest urban medical facility." He nodded slowly. "That's where it matters," he said. "Yes," she said. "That's the whole point." He looked at her for a moment with the assessing quality he usually kept behind the 3 degrees warmer than necessary manner. "I read the program notes," he said. "The field engineering team, the apprenticeship." He paused. "You're changing something about how this company thinks about knowledge." "I'm trying to," she said. "Good, good," he said, simply and without qualification. The same word Nolan had used on a park bench 6 weeks ago. She was finding that the most useful words tended to be simple. The program ran 45 minutes. Gavin spoke for 12 minutes about the cryocell technology, its clinical applications, and the bypass problem and solution. He was precise and clear, and landed the technical story with the economy of someone who has learned that audiences understand more than engineers expect if you trust them with the actual content. He named Nolan by name and explained the field expertise insight without making it a dramatic flourish. He said it the way you say true things. This is what happened. This is who saw it. This is why it mattered. Then Celeste spoke. She stood at the podium and looked out at 200 people and did not begin with the rehearsed version. She began with the waiting room. "About 5 months ago," she said, "I was sitting in a hospital waiting room with my daughter. She hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. Not to me, not to specialists, not to anyone. We'd been to 4 neurologists and more therapy appointments than I can count, and I had done everything I knew how to do, and it wasn't enough. And in that waiting room, a man sitting across from us played a voice recording on a cracked old phone. And my daughter, who hadn't said a word in 22 months, said 3 words to a stranger. The room was quiet. She hadn't planned to tell it this way. She was telling it this way. "That man's name is Nolan Pierce," she said. "He's now the director of field engineering at Halcyon. He's the person who looked at a diagram of our flagship product's thermal regulation system after 11 months of failed solutions and saw the root cause in 90 seconds, because he'd seen the same failure pattern in commercial refrigeration units for 11 years. He saw it because his entire career has been built on making things work in the real world, on understanding how systems behave when the conditions aren't controlled, when the humidity is wrong, and the road is rough, and the test environment doesn't tell the whole story." She paused. "And we had never been in a room with him. Not because he wasn't available, and not because his knowledge wasn't relevant. Because our hiring frameworks, our credentialing assumptions, our ideas about where expertise lives, they had never pointed us in his direction. She looked at the room. She looked at Gavin in the front row, who was nodding. She looked at Dean. She looked at Patricia Osei, who had come to the launch as a board representative and who was watching her with the focused attention of a person who is hearing something they expected to agree with and is confirming that they do. She looked at Nolan, at a table to the left of the stage, with Eli beside him and Ivy across from him, Ivy's sketchbook on the table next to her water glass. The field engineering program and the apprenticeship we're announcing today are not a philanthropic initiative, Celeste said. They're a structural correction. They're an acknowledgement that the knowledge we needed was never missing. We were just not looking in the right place. And the cost of not looking was $2.3 million and 11 months of a medical technology that people in places without reliable cold chain infrastructure have been waiting for. She paused. I'd like to think we would have found the answer eventually. I'd like to think that. But I also think that's the kind of comfortable story organizations tell themselves when they'd rather not reckon with what they've been overlooking, and I'm not interested in telling it. The room was quiet in the particular way of people who have been told a true thing and are deciding what to do with it. Nolan Pierce is at table 7, Celeste said. He solved a problem that changed this project's timeline by 4 months and changed what this technology can do for people who need it. He did it because he knows how things break in the real world. I'm grateful he was in that waiting room. I'm grateful my daughter spoke to him. She stopped. I'm grateful for a lot of things that I wasn't expecting. She stepped back from the podium. The applause that followed was real. Not the polite kind that fills space, but the kind that has something in it, that carries actual response. Nolan was looking at her. She met his eyes across the room, and he gave her the brief, honest nod. The same nod from the parking garage on the very first day. The nod that had communicated several things at once without performing any of them. And she received it and looked back at the room and let the moment be what it was. After the formal program, after Van Thorpe had spoken, and the cryocell units had been presented, and the catering had been released, and the room had dissolved into the particular organized chaos of a successful launch event, Celeste found Ivy at the edge of the room near the window. Ivy was drawing. She'd found a quiet corner with a view of the street below and the December sky that had finally decided on something. A pale, tentative light that wasn't quite sun and wasn't quite overcast. Just light. The ordinary kind. Doing what it could. She was drawing the view from the window, the street and the buildings and the pale sky, in a combination of pencil and the small watercolor set she'd started carrying alongside the colored pencils. Celeste stood beside her and looked at the drawing and didn't say anything for a moment. That's good, she said finally. The sky's hard, Ivy said. It's not really one color. No, Celeste agreed. It's doing several things at once. Ivy looked at the sky, then back at the drawing. She added a small stroke of pale gray that was right, that captured the thing the sky was actually doing. Celeste watched her do it with the uncomplicated awe she'd been trying to let herself feel toward her daughter without immediately cataloging it or managing it. Mom, Ivy said. Yeah. You talked about Dad. Celeste was quiet for a moment. In her speech, she hadn't named Marcus directly. She'd said my daughter hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years, and she'd said she hadn't said a word in 22 months, and she'd let the shape of what that meant carry without spelling out the accident or the loss or any of the details. But Ivy had been in the room. Ivy had heard it. A little, Celeste said. I talked about you. I know. Ivy was still looking at the drawing. It was okay, she said. The way you talked about it. She paused. You didn't make it sad. It is sad, Celeste said carefully. I know, Ivy said. But you talked about it like it was also something else. Like it led to stuff. She found a word with the precision she brought to things that required precision. Like it was part of something. Celeste sat down in the chair beside Ivy's. Outside, a few floors below, the December street went about its business. A taxi, 2 people walking with their hands in their pockets, a delivery truck making a turn. It is, Celeste said. Part of something. Ivy looked at her drawing. I miss him, she said. She said it the way she'd started saying hard things in the last month. not with the braced, careful quality of someone testing whether the floor will hold, but with the settled delivery of someone who has decided the floor holds and is walking on it. I miss him every day, but I think... She stopped, looked at her pencil, started again. I think it's okay to miss him and also have other stuff. I think maybe those go together. Celeste looked at her daughter, 7 years old in her green velvet dress with her sketchbook on her knee, saying the thing that therapists and books and 2 years of managed grief had been trying to reach, saying it in the plain, honest language of a child who had figured it out herself by living through it. Yeah, Celeste said. Her voice was very even. She was working for it. I think they do. Nolan misses Lauren, Ivy said. He still plays her recording sometimes. I've heard it. She looked at Celeste. That's not sad either. Or it is, but not only. Not only, Celeste agreed. Ivy went back to her drawing. She added something to the sky, a detail so small Celeste couldn't see exactly what it was, a mark that belonged to Ivy's private visual language, the one she'd been building for 2 years in November gray and pale yellow, and the colors that didn't have names yet. Eli appeared at Ivy's shoulder with the reliability of a person who has decided you are his responsibility and has accepted this without drama. He looked at the drawing. That's good, he said. Is that the sky right now? Yes, Ivy said. It looks right. He studied it. You could put a pigeon. There aren't any pigeons. There could be a pigeon. Ivy considered this with appropriate seriousness. Then she picked up a pencil and in 4 small strokes added a pigeon on the window ledge in the lower corner of the drawing. Eli looked at it with satisfaction. See, he said, pigeon. Nolan arrived behind Eli with 2 glasses of water and the expression of a man who has learned to accept that his son is going to involve himself in things and that this is not a problem to be solved. He handed 1 glass to Celeste. She took it. Good speech, he said. Did I say what I meant? He thought about it. Yeah, he said. I think you did. He looked at the window, at the December light. The part about where knowledge lives. I think people heard that. I hope so, she said. I hope it sticks with at least a few of them. It will stick with some and not others, he said. That's how it goes. Pragmatic, she said. I'm a refrigeration technician, he said. We're pragmatic. She looked at him. I was looking at this window with the honest, tired, present quality she had recognized in him from the very first morning, the quality of a person who has been through something real and has not come out of it pretending otherwise. He had a small coffee stain on his jacket that he either hadn't noticed or had decided was not worth the energy, and the jacket hung slightly wrong on one side because he'd put his phone in the inside pocket, and it was heavy. He was not a smooth person. He did not move through rooms like someone who had designed himself for rooms. He was just himself, thoroughly and without amendment, and she had come to understand that this was the hardest thing to find in a person and the most valuable, and that she had been lucky enough to find it in a hospital waiting room on a Tuesday morning when she had been out of options and her daughter had opened her mouth and said 3 words. Nolan, she said. He looked at her. Thank you, she said. For all of it. Not just the diagram. She held his gaze. For being in that waiting room, for answering her, for every Thursday and every park and every cup of coffee with a defective lid. She paused. For being the way you are with her, the way you are generally. He was quiet for a moment. The room behind them was full of voices and movement, 200 people who had come to see a product launch and had gotten something more than that. And ahead of them, the December window with Ivy's drawing taking shape on the page, the sky and the pigeon, and the pale, uncertain light that was just light, the ordinary kind. You know what Lauren would have said, he said, if she'd seen this. What? He smiled. A real one this time. Not the almost smile, not the almost laugh. An actual smile, Nolan's own, the one she'd been waiting to see fully and hadn't seen until now. She would have said she called it, he said, from the beginning. Whatever the beginning would have been. He looked at Celeste. She was right about most things. She would have been right about this. Celeste looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Marcus would have liked you too, for what it's worth. What makes you say that? Because you're funny about small things, she said, and he couldn't resist that in a person. Nolan's smile shifted into something quieter and more real, the version of it that held something harder underneath and didn't try to hide that. "I'll take it," he said. Ivy had finished the sky. She was looking at the drawing with the critical eye she brought to completed things, checking whether it was what she'd meant it to be. Whatever she'd decided, she closed the sketchbook. She looked up at the room, at Celeste, at Nolan, at Eli, who was now trying to take the pencil and add what he called one more pigeon, just one for balance. And something in her face settled in a way that Celeste recognized as the face her daughter made when she was somewhere she had decided was all right. That face. Celeste had not seen it in 2 years. She had been looking for it in every waiting room and therapy session and park morning, in every box brought home from storage, in every photograph hung back on walls from which they'd been removed. She'd been looking for the particular settled quality of a child who has decided the world is, on balance, manageable and good. She saw it now, in a hotel ballroom in December, with a pigeon on a window ledge and bad catering and 200 people in a sky that was doing several things at once. It was not a dramatic face. It was not a healed face, the kind that suggests the past has been resolved and put away and is no longer present. It was something more specific than that, something more honest. It was the face of a child who had decided that missing her father and loving the people around her and drawing skies that were hard to get right were not 3 separate things happening in 3 separate compartments of her life. They were the same thing. One thing. Hers. The room moved around them. Eli negotiated the pigeon question. Nolan said something quiet back to him about artistic integrity, and Eli said that wasn't a real phrase, and Nolan said it absolutely was. The December light came through the window, pale and certain, doing what it could. Celeste thought about what her daughter had said in the corner by the window. I think maybe those go together. Loss and love. Grief and ordinary joy. The people we carry and the people we find. She was 7 years old and she had worked this out in her own time, in her own language, without being pushed or managed or given a framework for it. Maybe that was what healing actually looked like when it wasn't being examined. Not a resolved thing, not a before and an after, just a person deciding at some ordinary unmarked moment that the weight they're carrying is something they can carry and walk at the same time. That moving forward doesn't mean moving away. She sounds nice. A cracked old phone in a waiting room. 3 words from a child who hadn't spoken in 22 months. 90 seconds in front of a diagram. A cup of coffee with a lid that didn't work. A pigeon on a window ledge that wasn't there until it was. None of it had been designed. None of it had been managed into existence by any of the planning and optimizing and relentless forward momentum that Celeste had applied to every solvable problem in her life. It had just happened, the way things that matter tend to happen. Sideways, at the wrong time, in the wrong room, when you were looking somewhere else entirely. She looked at her daughter's closed sketchbook and thought about everything inside it. November gray. A crying elevator. 2 figures in chairs with coffee cups. A camping trip, drawn from a photograph that lived in the hallway now. Marcus in penciled margins she couldn't read. A sky that was hard to get right because it was doing several things at once. All of it was true. All of it was hers. And that, Celeste understood, standing in the pale December light of a room full of people who had come to see a breakthrough and had mostly gotten one, that was enough. Not a perfect enough. Not a resolved and finished enough. The kind that breathes, that makes room, that carries the weight and keeps walking. That kind of enough. The kind you build quietly and without a blueprint, one ordinary moment at a time.